So I'm showing 9 o'clock, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. And first item of business is adoption of the agenda, moved by Ron Forbes, seconded by Katie Grigg, that the agenda be adopted as printed and circulated. Any issues with the agenda? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof? Not seeing any. I think, I don't usually make remarks at council, but I think it's appropriate today that as a democratic institution we acknowledge the struggle in Ukraine. I think their struggle for their actual freedom is a lesson for us all in what people are capable of when they put community ahead of self. Instead of being reluctant or resistant to the inconceivable problems they face, they have stepped forward to pick up a weapon and face one of the largest and most deadly threats imaginable. As we speak today, there is a 64-kilometer Russian convoy approaching Kyiv. Instead of running or surrendering, which would be completely understandable, Ukrainians are trading in their passports for Kalashnikovs, not a hot tub in sight. They have truly grasped the responsibility of democracy and are offering us all a lesson. I suggest that we owe it to them to learn it. Next is moved by Grigg, seconded by Forbes, that the minutes from the February 16th, 2022 council meeting be adopted as printed and circulated. Are there any issues with those minutes? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So we have a one-timed item, 9 o'clock zone change, which we will go to now. Spencer, you're ready to go. So have we got the applicant? I think I saw them on there ready to go, right? So zone change application ZN 5-21-16 submitted by Hog Construction Limited. Over to you, Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning, members of council, staff, and anybody who might be joining us virtually. This morning we're looking at an application for zone change to facilitate a residential development in the village of Thamesford. The application itself is reflective of both intensification and infill development within the service village. The report outlines for you the fact that this property is currently zoned under 3 different zone classifications.
Spencer, can
yes.
I just pause you there for a second? Because
yes.
I should have gone into our, I forgot our motion here on this.
No problem.
My fault. Moved by Forbes, seconded by Grigg, that the council meeting be adjourned at 9:03 a.m. For the purposes of holding a public meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Planning Act. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. My apologies. Back to you, Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The application before you is proposing to rezone the subject lands from Central Commercial Zone, General Industrial Zone, and Development Zone into an R3 special to accommodate a 10-unit residential development. As noted throughout the application was circulated, but in general, no comments or overarching concerns were raised as a result of the circulation. On page 4 of the report, you will note the various site-specific provisions that the applicant is seeking. Staff are of the opinion that they're comparable to those in the immediate area, in particular the townhouses which were recently approved along Middleton. They're also consistent with other similar developments throughout the county, insofar as the reliefs being requested are entirely appropriate in staff's opinion. Staff do feel that the application itself provides an additional housing type and form in the service village of Thamesford. It also promotes more intensive development than we have seen typically in the past, and is more of a medium density residential development. We are recommending approval of the application here today, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I will note that both the owner and the agent are also on the call if council has any questions for them.
Thanks, Spencer. Questions from council for the planner on the report? Not seeing any. And the applicant is here. And who's going to speak for the applicant? Is it Al or Jason?
I can speak on behalf of the.
I think Jason has something to say.
Okay, over to you.
Yeah, if you guys, I mean, if there aren't any questions, I think it's spelled out there pretty clearly in the planning report that we're asking for some slight increases in lot coverage and minor reductions in setbacks. And what's being requested is generally consistent with the development in the immediate area. So open to any questions on that.
Questions from council for the applicant? Paul?
I have 3 questions for you, Jason. The first one is, how many square foot per unit would these be?
Hal, I don't know if you're able to jump in on that one. I don't remember whether they're 1,500 square feet or.
In that neighborhood, as of right now, yes, in the neighborhood of 1,500 square foot bungalows.
Okay. And you may not want to answer my second question. If you don't, I understand. Is what expected price range for these units?
It's very, very hard to say, depending on when construction begins, what material does, where the market goes. That's very hard to say right now.
Okay, I understand that. And my last question is, how are you going to market these? Are you going to focus on local people, or are you going to be reaching out beyond this area?
We have already had local interest. We have a list going of about 4 or 5 people from the area that we will be calling first. And usually that word of mouth spreads. I don't see a whole lot of issue with marketing a product like this. I think that there's a lot of people, like 145 DeLater Street is a perfect example of basically what we're doing again, and that product seems to turn over with people in the village quite consistently. Usually those units don't sit on the market for any longer than a day, and they go to somebody's mother or father. So I anticipate this development being pretty much a mirror image of that one.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from council for the applicant? Not seeing any. Is there anybody here from the public to speak to this? No, thank you. All right, so I think that's it then. So guys, we're just going to go, just so you understand what's happening, we're going to go out of the public meeting now, and then council will decide on the application, okay?
Okay.
Okay. Moved
Thanks
by
a lot,
Forbes.
guys.
Moved by Forbes, seconded by Grigg, that pursuant to the Planning Act, the public meeting be adjourned at 9:08 a.m. and the regular meeting of council be called back to order. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And moved by Grigg, seconded by Forbes, that the Council of the Township of Zorra approve the zone change application submitted by Hog Construction Limited, whereby the lands described as part lots 5, 6, and 7, Park Lot 6, Registered Plan 45, part of Lot 22, Concession 1, North Dorchester, in the Township of Zorra, to rezone from Central Commercial Zone CC, Development Zone D, and General Industrial Zone MG, respectively, to Special Residential Type 3 Zone R3-11. Does anybody want to speak to that? Katie.
Just really quick, I think this is something that's really easy to support. This is excellent development for Tempsford. The similar development on DeLater Street has been fantastic for the community, and I think a lot of people have been looking for more of that. So I'm happy to see this development come forward, and happy to support the zone change.
Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. So Al and Jason, touch base with Spencer and Mike, and I think you guys know the ropes on this, but they will just make sure there is a waiting period and permitting period. You guys talk to them, and they'll walk you through that stuff, and away you go.
Thank you very much, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye.
You guys have a great day.
You too. And reports from staff. 8.1, Fire Department, Report 2022-043 from the Fire Chief regarding monthly fire report for February 2022. Chief, is there anything you want to highlight for council in there?
Good morning. A couple items to highlight. We're making some really good progress on our DCP program. It's been in my monthly report, I think, every month. And we're finally starting to move. We've got a tentative course booked, and that's going to help us license our firefighters for their DZ in-house, which has been backed up with the MTO drive test centers. So that's going to be a really positive thing, and you'll probably see more of coming forward once we get the agreements in place. Our Officer 2 change management project continues to move forward, and all of our officers that were available wrote their certification exam last week, so we're just waiting on results for that. We've got bunker gear fitting just happened, and we've reduced our numbers of purchase this year, so that's going to be a capital savings for our department this year. We were able to outfit almost all of our new recruits in existing bunker gear that was located and gathered in the other stations to get that back in service. Interviews and physical abilities testing was conducted in Tempsford. They originally, when we recruited, we didn't hire for the Tempsford station, but due to the retirement, we found an opening there, and we announced actually last night that Jeff Rustin and Jillian Breckelmans will be joining us on the Tempsford Fire Department, so our Tempsford Fire Station. So we are very excited to have them, and they'll be an excellent fit for the department. Our new recruits have finally started their practical training. They were postponed due to our most recent shutdown. We didn't want to have 43 recruits from the county gathering. They've now completed 2 sessions as well as their medical delegation training, and will do their first big hands-on practical training this weekend in Norwich. And we will host them the end of March, so if that's something that interests council and you'd like to attend, I welcome you to attend in Tempsford and see what we're doing there. And then those were my big highlights there. We also had 3M and Scott come in and demo some new SCBAs. That's a significant capital purchase coming up in about 5 years, so we wanted to start looking at what equipment was available and start shopping for that. So a really good presentation for them to the firefighters.
Questions from council? Paul?
Chief, I could ask you a question on every bullet point in your report, because I not only share your enthusiasm for the fire service, but your enthusiasm for detail. But I'll restrict myself to a question that comes down near the bottom of your report. Can you expand on your involvement with the Fire Service Women in Ontario and also with Camp Molly?
Yeah, so only at a distance. I have a membership with the Fire Service Women of Ontario, group of ladies that are working to support other women and empower women and grow women in the fire service. And over the years, when I first started as a firefighter, I was involved in their Camp Fit program, which is a 6-day or 5-day summer camp that they do for young women age 15 to 18 across the province, and encourage them and empower them to explore a career in firefighting. So I helped in London and Hamilton and Ottawa over the years, and I've really enjoyed it. And this year I saw that there was one being offered in Belleville by Chief Belair, who's been doing a lot of really great promotion. And it's in Belleville in July, so I've reached out and asked if I could attend and participate. So I will travel down there Thursday to Sunday in July and help support that program. And the big message is to empower these young girls to see themselves differently. They don't have to be a suppression firefighter. They'll have opportunities to do investigation, telecommunications, inspections, public education, and then they get to do all the fun stuff and climb the aerial and do auto X. And so they get a little bit of everything, and it turns out to be, it's neat to see these young ladies who have never had bunker gear on in a live burn often by the end of the week. So it's a very, very cool experience, and I'm proud to be able to be a part of it.
Thanks, Chief.
Anyone else? 2 things. One, you made me think there with so first of all, congratulations to the 2 new recruits in Tempsford. But also, we had talked at one point about all the other new recruits that were done at that time, and that normally they would come to a council meeting at some time. We were putting that off. I'm assuming the staff are still working on when we would be able to do that. And okay, so that's fine. The other thing is a little bit of an update for council, and thanks for the chief. At the last council meeting, we talked about the new certification requirements from the province, and council agreed that a letter should be written. I want to let you know that letter was written and sent. So I want to thank the chief, but I think council should know that the chief in fact worked all weekend on that, and it ended up not just being signed by herself and myself, but by all the chiefs in rural Oxford fire departments and all the mayors in rural Oxford as well. And the letter went to the Solicitor General on Monday, at least 2 of the rural mayors specifically reached out to me to thank Zorra, thank me actually, and I had to tell them it was actually the chief, for offering that leadership on that issue. They were very happy with the letter. One commented that when he saw the letter, he thought it was too long and was going to say that it should be edited down. That was my first response when I read it. But then I read it, and we both agreed that there was no way we could cut anything out of it because it was detailed in to the Solicitor General in what the problems were, but it was also very detailed in what actual real-world corrective actions could be implemented by Zorra and the other rural fire services, and we felt that it was a really appropriate document to send, that it would truly be helpful to the Solicitor General in the province, not only to Zorra and the rural fire services. So wanted to give that update to the council, and full credit to the chief. This is exactly the kind of initiatives that Zorra has done in the past, and frankly, you were hired to continue to do in the future. So thank you.
I will attach it to next month's report so that everyone can have a copy of it as well.
Yeah, it makes good reading. Any other questions for the chief not on the report? Moved by Forbes, seconded by Grigg, that report number 2022-043 from the fire chief be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And 8.2A, Recreation Department, report 2022-046 from the Director of Recreation Facilities regarding the monthly recreational report for February 2022. Matt, what would you like to highlight for council?
So I think the large change that's come this month, beginning yesterday, was the change to kind of reopening our facilities full capacity, reduction in some of the restrictions in place, including the removal of proof of vaccination requirement at the door. So that was a large change yesterday. So far, speaking to staff, it's been relatively smooth sailing. People are finding it easier to come to the building. If anything, people are surprised when they don't have to do the active screening but when they come to enter the facility. Beyond that, we are evaluating the March break camp currently in Embro, as we've had low registration, so we were kind of waiting to see what happened with that as we were writing this report. So currently we only have 3 registrants there, so we're contacting those families to see if they're able to switch to Tempsford to try and consolidate those 2 programs, and I'll update council farther once we've made that decision. And we'll communicate that out to families as well, what the registration kind of ends up being. So, and that's all I've got for highlights.
Questions from council on the report? Paul?
2 comments and a question. First of all, thanks, Matt, for including in your chart of comparative data for rental, comparing 2022 to 2020. I think it gives, at least for the first few months, a better idea of the impact of COVID rather than trying to compare it with last year and the openings and closing one. And the other one that I was really happy to see was that you expect to see a number of employees coming back again this year for the camps and for the pool. And I think that's 2 things. That means you got good continuity in the program from year to year, and also shows that Zorra Township is a good place to work. And I think that's good for us looking forward, not only for hiring part-time staff in the future, but also potentially full-time staff when we require them. So those are my 2 comments. My question is, with the changes in requirements for proof of vaccination and active screening, what impact does that have on the workload for the recreation staff?
So prior to, I guess it'd be September 2021, we would have in the peak hours with our games and evenings, weekends going, we would have a full-time operator as long with a part-time facility attendant to assist with janitorial staff. When the proof of vaccination came into effect, we needed somebody at the door full-time to do that screening. So we brought in another part-time attendant to conduct that screening. Now we've reduced that, though that staff person, dedicated front door person, is no longer there. So we are reducing the staff as far as that goes, and then we're dividing the shifts out among the staff that we had hired, so they're getting a few less shifts. So that's our reduction in staff.
And follow up, what's the impact on last year's budget and this year's budget of that extra staffing?
Forecasted budget, there won't be any difference, because when we started the year and developed our budget, we didn't know we were going to require proof of vaccination. So when we look at what we our actuals in that case, though, I think we were over about, in between both facilities, about $25,000 to add that staffing in to both facilities over the season. So our forecasted budget should stay the same because we were anticipating the lower staffing level, but hopefully this year, if we don't get that surprise curveball, we can stay closer to actuals.
Okay, thanks, Matt.
Anybody else on this report? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Forbes, that report 2022-046 from the Director of Recreation and Facilities be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Any other questions for Matt not on the report? Matt, 8.2B, report 2022-047 from the Director of Recreation and Facilities regarding free menstrual products.
So this is more just to bring back some detail and clarity. We'll be including this in the first draft of the operating budget when Diane presents it. So just kind of the outlines, the basic operating costs of that program. We're still working with plumbing contractors and to get better estimates for the change room renovation. So that's a report that should come on the 16th meeting with greater detail. If I put it on this report now, it was going to be a very high-level guesstimate, and I don't think it would do the report justice. So,
Any questions for Matt on this report? Paul?
Question might be for Matt or might be for Diane. And I noticed in the report it said that the entire amount was going to be included in the operating budget for this year. On the surface, it would appear that the dispensers would be a capital. So maybe if you could just explain to me why some things are capital and some things aren't, or operating.
so Diane, you want to take it? Or I'll give you my quiz. Basically from the cost of the products for the dispensers, that isn't large enough, and also it's split amongst 7 facilities. So that's not going to be an asset at one facility that expands the lifespan of that facility or kind of adds significant value to that facility. So it falls to operating instead of capital.
Yeah, that's just one of those inside politics questions that I ask once in a while.
But I think worth asking, right? Like, so that we understand like what staff are doing in terms of what's capital and why, and what gets amortized and why. I mean, in this case, it's not a hugely significant amount of money, but the concepts apply. So, anybody else? Questions on this report? Moved by Forbes, seconded by Grigg, that report 2022-047 from the Director of Recreation and Facilities be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thanks, Matt. When I was saying thanks, Matt, I almost signed Matt on this. One thing at a time. 8.3A, Building and Drainage Department, report 2022-045 from the Chief Building Official Drainage Superintendent regarding monthly building report for February 2022. Mike, is there anything you want to highlight?
I guess I would just say single-family dwellings, obviously up again this year, and a couple of those are in the Embro subdivision, so it's finally started to go as well.
Questions from council on the report? Paul?
My question on the Townsend Stirk drainage project, and it's been 5 years since that was petitioned for, and do you have a timeline of when we expect that report to come back, and if there's any possibility of that construction this year?
So I did contact the engineer about it, and they think they'll have me a report this year. I'm hoping they will, and construction will be the year after, typical of that.
Okay, thanks. It's a long, slow process when it gets to
Drainage tends to be anymore.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Moved by Grigg, seconded by Forbes, that report 2022-045 from the Chief Building Official's Drainage Superintendent be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And thanks, Mike. 8.4A, Public Works Department, report 2022-044 from the Director of Public Works regarding a monthly Public Works report for February 2022. Steve, is there anything you want to highlight for council?
No, nothing on this report.
Questions from council? Paul?
No questions, but a comment, and there's 2 big thank yous going your way, Steve. I'll leave the big one to the mayor, but I want to thank you for your explanation about the 14-day work cycle and the reasoning behind declaring a significant weather event. I wasn't aware of what regulations and how that came in, so I appreciate you including that in the report.
Anyone else? Steve?
Yeah, when I seen the notice that you'd set out, I was going to say to Steve, I came across 33 going over to Interkip that day, and there were 7 cars. And there was 3 active tow trucks, 1 ambulance, and the run-ins from another 4. So, and the road was, I was glad I had all-wheel drive. So it made sense when I seen that was called.
Anyone else? Yeah, so I guess the big one, as you say, Paul. So thanks to the entire Public Works Department for that. Steve was messaging myself and Don over the whole period on the weekend saying, here's where we're at, here's what's going on, here's what I think we should do. Needless to say, Don and I just gave our automatic support to what he was going to do. What I want to make particular note of here for people who, you know, haven't maybe read or fully understood the excellent explanation that Paul referenced that Steve gave in here is that by the time the significant weather event is declared, that's because our staff have already been working a lot of hours, right? So a lot of people will think the significant weather event happens, oh, now they're going to work. No, they've already worked it. That's why he does it. And then they go on to work more significant hours after that. And really the roads were terrible. The blowing was terrible. There was no plowing it and it was done. It was just constant plowing.
Yeah.
And so really, I mean, I know I told you before, but please pass on council's thanks to all staff. Please let them know that while we haven't been in the plow with them, we understand that they were already working a lot when the significant weather event was declared, and thank them for the work up to and after that.
Thank you all. I will pass that on for sure.
Steve?
Just a general question for Steve. On the way in here this morning, it's got nothing to do with your report or anything.
Well, let me just do this first then. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by McDonald, that report 2022-044 from the Director of Public Works be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Steve?
No,
Question not on the report?
when I was coming down here this morning, I was coming across 78 and over by the community center. The Bower Hill boys, there was 4 trucks out there and they were grinding up limbs. Are they trimming up our trees or where?
It's one of the recreation properties. It's on the bottom side of the east SEC. We had some dead ash trees on a tree line with our buddy neighbor there. So
Okay.
they were moving.
I couldn't see where they'd been working, but I seen the results were out there and wood all over the place, and I was just going curious. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Matt.
8.4B, report 2022-042 from the Director of Public Works regarding a construction update of the Zorra Maintenance Building. Steve, anything you want to highlight in that?
No, nothing to highlight, I don't think. It's pretty much all there.
Questions from council on the report? Paul?
I want to talk about contingency accounts and change orders. And we've got another change order here that, in my opinion, should have been included in the RFP. I don't have any problem with the additional compressed air drops. That's sort of like when you're building a house, you get to a point where the electricians come in, you say, well, maybe I should have another outlet there. But I believe we did have fairly comprehensive plans originally for these air drops. But the fire damper, if that is something that is part of the fire code and wasn't included in the RFP. So my first question is to you, Steve, is how much is our contingency account that we included in that contract that we approved when we awarded this building?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. The contingency allowance is with $350,000 for this project.
Okay. And my follow-up question is, what can we do and how much is it costing us, all these extra things that have been added on? We've talked about this before, Council, how unhappy we are with what's going on here. What's our alternatives to deal with this, and how much is it costing us every time one of these things is added?
So the contingencies are, sorry, they're not contingencies, but the change orders, when they come in, it's cost us an extra 20% on top of the cost of what's priced out for these changes. That's the most concerning part about the change orders. Yes, things are missed, things have been being missed that should have not have been. If they had not been, they would have been included in the tender price, and we would have been paying for them, but not the extra 20%. And I think, truly that's where we should be pressuring Chamberlain's on that extra that we're paying, and for their expertise wasn't performed very well in some of these items. Don and I have, Don McLeod and myself had several conversations with Chamberlain's about this. We've also had meetings about this. They are very aware of our displeasure about this. Of course, the project's not done, so we don't have a full scope of what's happening here yet until it's complete, or mostly complete. We still got a ways to go.
Anyone else? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by Forbes, that the mayor write a letter to Chamberlain Architect Services Limited expressing council's concern about the number of change orders issued during construction of the Zorra maintenance facility, many of which should have been anticipated and included in the RFP that was prepared by Chamberlain Architect Services Limited on behalf of the Township of Zorra. Maybe you want to speak to this?
Yeah, we're not happy about what's happened here. We paid somebody to provide their professional input into this RFP. And the original presentation that Chamberlain made to the previous council in 2018 had a 15% contingency account in there. My son-in-law is an estimator for a major contractor, and I asked him about it. He says, normally they start out working on a project at about maybe 10% contingency, and by the time it comes to bid, they're at 2 to 5%. So at $350,000 on our on the contract that we awarded of just under $9 million, we're at about 3.9%. So we're in that range of 2 to 5% of a contingency account. But when I go down the list of change orders, I look at test well buried earth loop, increase in steel joists over administration section, builder's risk insurance, service pit drainage, increase in septic size and design, conduit and cabling for security cameras, and now the fire dampers. Now, those are all things that I think should have been caught, and they add up to a little over $92,000 plus whatever it's going to cost us for the septic size redesign. And I don't think that's acceptable. I think I looked up in Webster's dictionary what the definition of a contingency account is, and it says a reserve set aside against unforeseen expenses. And a number of months ago, Steve relayed to us that Chamberlain's definition is a reserve set aside against expenses that we forgot to put in the RFP. That's basically what they've told us. And I don't think we should sit here and say, okay, yeah, we got $350,000. That $350,000 is getting eaten up. We don't know the final number on septic size design, and we don't know what the final number is on a legitimate unforeseen problem with the geothermal well drilling. And the initial estimate on that was as high as $250,000. So if our $350,000 contingency is eaten up, we're over budget, and we could be over budget by several $100,000 the way we're going. So I think we're at a point where I know Steve and Don have been talking to Chamberlain without much results. I think it's time that we put our, as Marcus hasn't said this in a long time, but to put our big girl pants on and say Chamberlain, we're not happy. What are you going to do about it? Because this is going to cost us extra money.
Anyone else? Ron?
Yeah, Paul hit on all the points, the change orders that I think absolutely should have been caught by Chamberlain when they did this. And I have a question for Diane. Are we still paying Chamberlain like a monthly amount as this project goes on, or how's that being handled?
Yes, they bill us monthly.
Okay. So we do have a little leverage with them at the moment. Okay, that's fine.
Anyone else? Katie?
Paul, I like your looking up definition of contingency and referencing what it's actually meant for versus what it, is being interpreted as. I think one of the other things is that even if we stay within that $350,000, even at the end, if we don't go over budget with this, but our contingency was eaten up by things that should have been in that RFP that were errors as opposed to unforeseen things. I think that it's fair to assume that there's added pressures for this build to keep costing as low as possible as we navigate unforeseen situations, because there are so many things that have been added into this that are coming out of contingency, out of error. So I think even if at the end of this we were able to stay within that $350,000, but it wasn't for good reason, for legitimate reason, I think that there will be reflections in the final product of where things were dialed back a bit and we're not getting quite what it is we need because it wasn't seen as enough of a need to put it into that contingency and use it as it needs to be used. So I think that this is really, I'm glad you did this. I think this has been a concern, and we've been sort of bouncing around how do we push this forward. And thank you for taking the lead on this.
Anyone else? Steve?
Yeah, I think I agree with what everyone else has said so far. Over my years at work, I worked on many multi-million-dollar projects, and you always had a contingency built in, but it was for truly unforeseen stuff. And I think what got my goat the most on the list of change orders was security cameras, costing in the security cameras and then forgetting the cabling to hook them up. Like, that just drove me crazy. And I'm going, that's not unforeseen. That's, oops, we forgot. And that's not right. We shouldn't be on the hook for that.
And if I could add something to that, there is some things on here, such as the security cameras was always an owner-supplied part of this project. So we were going to be paying that as an extra to this project. That one in particular is one that we were expecting to pay over and above the tendered price. Other ones, though, such as the rerouting the primary duct banks, even when it comes down to the backup power, a lot of stuff when the building was spec'd in two ways with the geothermal, a lot of things changed when we went to a geothermal option. Backup power obviously couldn't, but it obviously could have powered a lot more than what was on the original drawing, and that's why what we had to fine-tune a lot of these things to make it work for our building. And of course, that cost us money.
Anyone else? I think in the end, we quite rightly recognize that we don't have the in-house expertise or experience to build a $10 million building, having never done it before. So we outsourced that expertise, and we're not getting the expertise that we paid for, is what it comes down to for me. So I'll be very happy to write this letter with Don and see where that goes. Hopefully that'll enable some meetings with Chamberlain, and they'll understand the seriousness of this coming from council on behalf of residents, that they ultimately want to get the building that they agreed to pay for the price that they agreed to pay for it. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Steve, you're going to talk to Dawn about that, and the three of us will talk about the letter and craft something up.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
8.5A, Finance Department, Report 2022-038 from the Director of Finance regarding the 2021 Annual Building Department Report. Diane, is there anything you want to highlight for council on that?
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Questions from council for the Director of Finance? Not seeing any. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by McDonald, that the 2021 Building Department excess revenue in the amount of $2,572.41 be transferred to the Building Department Reserve Fund in accordance with Section 7 of the Ontario Building Code Act. All those in favor? Opposed? None. That is carried. A lot of money in there. Looks like Mike might be getting a new truck. 8.6A, Corporate Services Department. Report 2022-032 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk regarding Zorra Task Force survey results. Alicia, is there anything you want to highlight in that for council?
I just wanted to say that I did receive some additional feedback and comments. It's not included in this report because it didn't pertain to the survey, and I wanted for this report to focus solely on the survey results, but the next report will have all comments and feedback from the public.
Questions from council on this report? Katie.
Just a comment for anyone on council who doesn't sit on one of the current committees that this report did go out to the current sitting committees for their information and for their comment, and in that correspondence, Alicia also let them know that through the committees they would have additional opportunity. Well, the survey itself seems to indicate that a lot of them did participate in providing feedback through that. They will have additional opportunities through their respective committees to comment and provide feedback on this. So thank you very much, Alicia, for getting that out. I know that the committee members, I've had some discussion with some of them, and I know that they really appreciated being kept in the loop right out of the gate with that. And I also want to thank Alicia for the presentation of this survey results, the way that this report is written, the summaries involved. It's incredibly easy to digest. The takeaways are laid out right, nice and clear for us. So, and the report is also very clear that, you know, this is just something we can look at now, but there will be future reports, and no decisions are being made right now. So I just wanted to thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Anyone else? Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Alicia. Just a genuine comment. There was one sentence or one little line in there that really has me perplexed, and it said, the survey asked committee member respondents what they didn't like about sitting on the committee, and the top response was time between meetings. So it sounds like they wanted more, but they said they hated meetings. So that bamboozles me. Just a comment.
Anyone else? Yeah, I think everything that Katie said about the report, but also, or slightly the same, actually. Well, just that I really think it's important, because when council decided to end the committees and move to a different thing, the different system, the idea was that there would be a process to get to that different system, and this is an update on that process of getting that input. So, so I think that's important. Thank you. Moved by McDonald, seconded by Mitchell, that report 2022-032 from the Legislative Coordinator Deputy Clerk be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Yes? Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, they're not sitting in this room, and they may or may not watch this later, but I also think that for the, what was it, 67, 66 responses, that I really appreciate each and every person who took the time to fill out this survey, because we are dedicated to doing this work to improve resident engagement, and we wouldn't be able to achieve that if we didn't have residents speaking up and saying what it is that's going to work for them. So sending out our thanks to everyone who is participating in this process so we can get there.
And I think we're now at 10 boards and committees. So I have a motion here to receive and file A and B. Paul, you're going to give a verbal update on Upper Thames. Does anybody want to speak to the Zorra Recreation Advisory Committee? Everybody's okay with doing both, receiving and filing both? Okay, then Paul, you can give your verbal update.
The annual general meeting of the Upper Thames Board was on February 17th, still meeting by Zoom. Top item on the agenda was the 2022 budget, which was preceded by a discussion about the compensation review. And the Upper Thames is doing something very similar to what Zorra Township did last year, is looking at all compensation, and there will be a report coming back to the board in April or May with recommendations on that. As far as the budget itself, the operating budget is $17.4 million with a municipal levy of just under $6 million. And the only township that voted against it was West Perth and, East Perth. The flood control capital budget was $1.3 million with a municipal levy of $840,000. That passed unanimously. And the non-flood control capital budget of a very small number of $440,000 with a $184,000 municipal levy passed unanimously. We approved the factual certificate, which is an annual confirmation that all the requirements of an employer and as a business have been met for 2021. We had a report on WECI applications, which is the provincial funding to do flood control projects. We're applying for 9 projects for a total of $480,000, and included in that is $40,000 for an environmental assessment for the Embro Dam. Inventory of programs and services. There was a series of charts giving a summary of funding for the different categories. So everything's broken down into category 1, 2, and 3, and then the charts also showed the totals of the funding for each category, and it breaks down to 39% municipal levy, 60% self-generated, and 1% from the provincial transfer, even though the province has all the power to tell us how to operate. There was a list that included a list of each program, a description, a category, and legislative reference. The last year 5-year average budget and the 2022 budget, with the percentage of municipal levy and percentages of self-generated funding for each one of those programs. So a tremendous amount of work done by Upper Thames staff. If anybody interested in the details, it's all on the Upper Thames website. We had a delivery report on permits for 2021, and the Minister of Natural Resources has a standard that all major applications be completed within 90 days and minor applications within 30 days. And the Upper Thames had 153 permits, with 91% of them meeting that standard. Conservation Ontario has a much more stringent standard, with 28 days for major applications and 21 days for minor applications, and Upper Thames was at 76% on that, and which is considered very good because not only the challenges of COVID and working from home and everything. London area, according to the latest census, the 2021 census, showed a 10% growth in the last 5 years, and that's the 4th largest in Ontario. So accompanying with that growth is a lot of building going on. And Upper Thames has also seen a fair bit of turnover in that department, the regulations department. And so to achieve either 91% or 76% was quite good considering everything. We had a report on the Phase 2 regulation consultations, and we've talked in the past about the changes at the Conservation Act, what they are. This Phase 2 is the proposed regulations about how they actually will be implemented, so what levies can be charged, what prices can be charged for the Class 2 programs, fees policy, and also there was a section in there on Conservation Authority transparency. There were the long service awards that we always give out at the AGM. This year there were 5 employees with 10 years service, 6 with 15 years service, 5 with 20 years service, and 1 with 35 years. And that is John Enright, our forester. So you can imagine how many trees he's planted or supervised in 35 years. And finally, once again, there were several awards that were not handed out this year because of the Zoom format, but we did hand out the Inspiration Award, which goes to an educator involved in environmental work, and that went to a woman named Erin Much, who is a Thames Valley teacher, and she's also been the the education coordinator for environmental education, working between the school board and the Upper Thames. So she was the award recipient for this year on that. Yeah, that's one of her things, and she's actually moving out of that role because she's taking on, I think, an assistant principal at Nedway. So anyway, that was our meeting.
Anyone else? Moved by Mitchell, seconded by McDonald, that items 10A through B be received and filed for information purposes only. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And information items. So I have one for 11A and one for 11B. So 11A, Oxford County Resolution re TVDSB trustee distribution. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by McDonald, that the Township of Zorra supports the motion passed by Oxford County Council, which supports equitable representation on the TVDSB that balances the rural interests within the geography of Thames Valley, and that this resolution be forwarded to the Oxford, Elgin, and Middlesex Councils, the Minister of Education, the TVDSB, the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and all Oxford, Elgin, and Middlesex MPPs. Anybody want to speak to that? Paul?
I just brought forward a support motion, I think similar to, we talked earlier about the letter regarding firefighter training, that the more councils that support something, the more weight it carries when it goes to whoever we're trying to influence on this. So I just thought a support motion from Zorra Township to the motion that was passed by Oxford County was worth it.
Anybody else? I will just add then, before calling the vote, I just want to thank you for bringing that forward as support. Couldn't agree more. And if anybody's interested in this, I have posted on social media about it as well, and I would suggest anybody who's interested in contact their Oxford trustees, or any trustees, frankly. And I would add that it isn't just a rural issue, in that, you know, there are urban areas within Oxford, Elgin, and Middlesex that are urban but would equally be affected by this. So it is. Yeah, all at once sort of simple in terms of democracy and representation, but also slightly more complex than that. So I would just encourage you to contact trustees, and maybe not your own Oxford trustee, but others in London as well about it. Anybody else want to speak to it then? All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And moved by McDonald, seconded by Mitchell, that item 11B be received and filed for information purposes only. Anybody want to speak to that one? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And no unfinished business, notices of motion. So I hand over to you, Paul.
Notice of motion moved by Mayor Marcus Ryan, seconded by Ron Forbes. Whereas robust high-speed internet access is essential for 21st century living, and some Zorra residents live in virtually unserviced areas, therefore it be resolved that staff work with relevant experts to develop a request for proposal to complete all areas of the township with fiber to the property that are not already or anticipated to be serviced, and that a report proposing the RFP be brought back to council for the May 4th meeting. Marcus, as a mover, would you like to speak to it?
I would, thank you. I simply am bringing this forward at this point because there's a lot of balls in the air on fiber to the home. There are at least, I think, 3, if not 4, provincial and federal programs right now that are all up in the air attempting to deliver increased internet service in our area, in Zorra Township and Oxford County. None of them have been finalized. They're all at various stages of progress in terms of what they're proposing to implement, where they're going to implement it. And I know this council has struggled with, you know, do we continue to fund the what's been known as Swift Plus, but essentially, you know, funding of fiber to the home? Do we continue to fund that? And so I talked with Don about, you know, what would his actual ability be to do that. And so I wrote this with the intent being that it would just give council direction to staff to actually work on this, work with all the relevant parties and any information they have, and try and bring a report back so that we would be better informed. So the intention here is that, depending on what happens with the other levels of government, what they actually do, where they actually do it, that combination of that and this report would leave council more informed as to what they wanted to do. And the intention here is that we would have it in time before we finalize budget. That's frankly somewhat dependent on what the other programs announce and when they announce it. So my intention here essentially is for council to give direction to Don to actually work on this and attempt to bring us back a report so we're better informed. Thanks.
Anyone else like to speak to it? Don, do you have any comments on this?
No, the mayor and I have talked about this, so I will be able to hopefully have a report done by May 4th.
Okay, thank you.
What is that?
If there's no other comments or questions, I'll read the motion. And whereas robust, high-speed internet access is essential for 21st century living, and some Zorra residents live in virtually unsurfaced areas, therefore it be resolved that staff work with relevant experts to develop a request for proposal to complete all areas of the township with fiber to the property that are not already or anticipated to be serviced, and that a report proposing the RFP be brought back to council for the May 4th meeting. All in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Thank you. And I'll hand back the chair to the mayor.
And 13B, notice of motion regarding tree by-law changes. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by McDonald, whereas Zorra is an environmentally conscious community, are good stewards of our natural environment, and we protect our environment. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by McDonald, whereas Zorra is an environmentally conscious community, are good stewards of our natural environment, and we protect our environment by valuing our natural assets and using our resources wisely. And whereas one of the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority's environmental targets is to establish and restore 1,500 hectares of natural vegetation cover, windbreaks, and buffers by 2037, therefore be it resolved that staff bring a report to council considering changes to the tree bylaw to include a 4-to-1 ratio of replacement trees, review Schedule B, Township of Zorra Tree Bylaw 13-19 tree species with UTRCA, prohibit trimming of removal during nesting season, and plant excess trees on roadsides as appropriate whenever possible. Paul, as the mover, do you want to speak to that?
I have to admit I can't take a whole lot of credit for this. Marcus actually wrote the motion and asked me to move it for procedural reasons. But he and I have been talking over the last almost a year about possibly coming forward with this type of motion. The bylaw was last updated in April of 2019, so it's not real old, but it is 3 years already. The current bylaw has a replacement ratio of 2 trees for every 1 removed, and the proposal is looking at 4-to-1 replacement. Schedule B of the bylaw only has ash, sugar maple, and several varieties of oak. There may be other varieties that we should be looking at, and there's no mention in the current bylaw about nesting season. Removing and planting trees is quite controversial at times throughout the township, and I think it makes good sense to having a review of the bylaw, and that there may be some fine-tuning that can be done in there. One thing that's not in the motion that I would also like to see done is looking at the height of trimming, because I know as a truck driver, when I come up to intersections, sometimes the trees are trimmed so that if you're driving a pickup or a car, you can see, but when you're driving a bigger truck, you can't. So I know that's not part of the motion, but since I had a chance to talk, I wanted to throw that 2 cents in there. So that's the reason that kind of jointly we brought the motion forward.
Anyone else? Steve?
Yeah, I've agreed to bring this, second it, and bring it forward for discussion. I have no issues whatsoever with planting more trees for every one we cut down, and planting them wherever, increasing the number of varieties, no problem. I do take issue with prohibiting trimming or removal during nesting season. If it's involving road safety or pragmatic timing, like doing it in the warm weather, I'm as much a conservationist as anyone, but I think that's going overboard. Just my comment.
Anyone else? Katie?
I think when we sit in these chairs, we have an opportunity to not just make sort of the detailed decisions about what we want to happen right now, right today, but we have the responsibility of looking at implementing policy that carries through what we think is the right thing for our township in a more sustainable way. And so what I see here in this motion, which I will absolutely support, I think it's fantastic, is number one, I think we see a policy, a potential policy change to better reflect our actual tree replacement practices. Our practices exceed our current policy standard, and by consideration of updating the policy, I think it gives our current practices we're committing to continuing to do the great things that we're doing today in a more sustainable way. As people change out of the seats that they're in, the good work that's being done by today's staff and council will carry forward. And the other thing that I really like about this is, regardless of what we end up deciding in terms of policy, that we are considering a change to policy that is being triggered by concerns that have come up from multiple residents about our current practices. So, we're never going to arrive at something that everyone is going to be happy with, but I think that we have a responsibility when something's been identified as a concern to sort of look at what our practices and policies are and see if there's room for improvement. So I will be in full support of this and looking forward to the report that comes back.
Ron?
I just have a quick question for Steve, since he's still here. The last line of this motion talks about planting them on roadsides, and we have not planted on roadsides for quite a number of years. I just wondered what Steve's comment is on that.
It's challenging. We found better success and better survival rate by giving the trees to property owners that want to plant them either on the roadside or on their own property, anywhere within Zorra. We found better success rate because people that take the time to plant them take the time to take care of them and water them when needed. That's where it stretches our staff to be able to follow up. It's no problem getting the trees in the ground. More work is needed usually when it's to keep that tree alive, right? And some, spring conditions are quite dry, and it's quite time consuming going around water and making sure they're going to catch. So I can see some challenges with this, but I mean, that's why we're going to dig into this and revisit this tree by law and see what we can come up with.
Anyone else? Just then to as Paul said, he and I worked on the wording of this, and much as Paul said, he looked up the word of the meaning of the definition of contingency. When I write these things, I really spend some time on them, and so to me, the important part is that staff bring a report considering changes too. So, and after that, I wanted to give specific direction to them as to what I was going to be looking for in it. But frankly, I'm not the expert in this. That's why I've asked for the report. So I want to tell staff, these are the things that I would like this report to consider. But frankly, if staff think that some of these things are not a good idea and they have reasons for that, I want to hear that too. And in the end, it's always up to this council when we get that report back. This council votes whether they want to do it or not do it. But my intention was that these things be considered, and that's why. So I meant literally the wording in here. Bring a report that considers those things. Whether they recommend those things or not is another matter, and whether this council decides to vote for those things or not is another matter. So that was my intention. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. And bylaws. Moved by Mitchell, seconded by McDonald, that bylaw 18-21 be taken as read a first, second, and third time and finally passed, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Items of community interest. So I'm looking at my calendar, and items of community interest wise, I see. Does anybody know if there is? I have Emerald Legion brunches had started again, and there would be one scheduled for this Sunday. Do you know if it is happening? It is. Okay. Okay. Sorry, that's not this Sunday. It's actually Sunday the 13th. My apologies. Yeah. Yeah. I know it was in the crier flyer at one point, but then things changed again and it was off, and I just wasn't 100% sure if it was back on again or not. I hope it is. I get hungry on a Sunday morning. So then we're not back here then as we normally would be on the 16th of March because of March break. So I think the next thing I'm showing is back here on the 23rd, if I'm not missing anything. I think Paul. Sorry, yes, thank you. 23rd, 9 a.m. And that's the special budget meeting, so it'll be slightly different agenda.
Correct.
Almost entirely budget?
Correct.
Yeah. Paul?
Upper Thames meeting on the 22nd in the morning, and ZREC meeting at 7 o'clock on the 22nd. And on the 11th, something I'm really looking forward to is Upper Thames is going to have a training session to do with some of the changes to Conservation Act mediated by Nigel. So I've missed training sessions for Nigel and Fred the last 2 years, so I'm really looking forward to that on the 11th.
Anyone else? Ron, did you have your hand up for something? No? Okay. That's all I'm showing for items of community interest. Katie?
There's a multi-use courts committee meeting next Tuesday evening. And I believe we're back in person, right? Is that our first one back in person? Yeah.
Anyone else? All right. Then, no closed session. I got confirmatory and adjournment. Karen, you're good? Moved by McDonald, seconded by Mitchell, that bylaw 19-22 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of council held March 2nd, 2022 be read a first, second, and third time this March 2nd, 2022, and further that the mayor and clerk are hereby authorized to sign the same and affix the corporate seal thereto. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. And moved by Mitchell, seconded by McDonald, that this session of council be now adjourned and herewith closed at 10:08, sorry. 10:08 a.m. and the next meeting of council be called for March 23rd, 2022 at 9 a.m. in the council chambers of the Township Municipal Office. And just before we pass that, Karen, do you know, I know it's weird to ask a question at adjournment, but just, we're going to be in person. I'm just wondering, do we know where we're at in terms of residents being able to attend in person for planning meetings and delegations? Not yet. Thank you. Any questions on that? All those in favor? Opposed? That is